Deliberate Leaders. I am your host, Allison Dunn, founder of the Deliberate Leaders podcast, dedicated to helping leaders build strong, thriving businesses. Each episode, we feature inspiring interviews to help you on your leadership journey. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest today. We have with us Dr. Paula Caligiuri. She is an award-winning author, distinguished academic, and leading expert in cultural agility, offering proven, research-backed approaches to help professionals succeed and thrive in any country with people from any culture. Her newest book is Build Your Cultural Agility, the 9 Competencies of Successful Global Professionals. Paula, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be with you, Allie.
Thank you. I heard my little buzzer go off, so I'm going to turn that off. I would love to get this kicked off with my favorite question. So what would be your number one leadership tip that you would give our Deliberate Leader listeners?
Okay. Use any opportunity that you have to interact with someone from another culture, another generation, so any context that's different from your own. Use any one of those opportunities to really learn what his or her values are. It's a skill that we just don't do enough of.
I think that is an outstanding tip, and one that we've not had yet on the show. Can you give me one or two opening lines? What would help someone extract that in a way that felt like it wasn't a tooth canal, but comfortable?
Right. So let me give you a question I'd love to ask. If I ever have to, say, for example, give a keynote speech in another country or to an audience I'm unfamiliar with, I always ask the question, if somebody's local or clearly understands the context, how, given everything you know about this group, everything you know about this culture, everything you know about this, whatever, fill in the blank, this organization, how could I be more successful delivering this keynote? Or how could I be more successful in this meeting? How could I be more successful, whatever the it is that you're doing? It's that idea that you're saying, look, I fully understand that the context is different, and that no matter how effective I think I can be regularly, I appreciate that this context might be different. And it's a great leadership technique to appreciate values.
I think that would be just a general overall, if you get an opportunity to ask that of someone, regardless if it's, in the States next door, in a business in your community, that's a powerful question. And it'll probably give you an awful lot of insight. Yeah, good tip. Can you just kind of give an overview of what is cultural agility?
Sure. It's the ability we have to comfortably and effectively work in different countries and with people from different cultures. That could be generational cultures, it could be professional cultures, it could be organizational cultures. Anytime we are in kind of that situation of novelty, it's the ability to do that well.
Okay. It is becoming, the world is a very small place, and we have the opportunity to work with people from all different cultures and locations right now. So I feel like it's very prevalent. In your book, you talk about competencies around that. So could you kind of give a high-level overview of what type of competencies people need to be thinking about?
Right. So Allie, it's interesting. When everybody thinks about cultural agility, they oftentimes right away go to, if I'm in Germany, therefore I should do this, or if I'm in China, I should do that. Actually, those are important. So it's like the one half of cultural agility. You still need to understand how contexts differ. If I'm with a certain generation, I should act like that, right? But there's a whole nother half of cultural agility that's equally critical that almost no one talks about. And that's what's discussed in the book. It's the competencies of people who are successful in cultural agility. So things like how they manage themselves. It could be their tolerance of ambiguity or their resilience. It could be the way they interact with others, with their humility or their perspective taking. And it could be how they manage their tasks. And that's, whether they know how to adapt or whether they know how to hold the standard of their organization. So each of those have a very different way of behaving, their competencies that can be developed uniquely, and they're all important.
So how does someone measure their cultural agility?
Okay, well, so, I mean, the easiest feedback is how successful are you in a different cultural context? As oftentimes we don't know that we're kind of messing up in a cultural situation until either someone tells us or sort of the environment gives us feedback that something didn't go particularly well. So that's kind of the most immediate way to know. We have assessment tools. In fact, there's a free tool that you don't need to buy the book to get the tool. It's called My Guide, MYGIIDE.com. People can go on there, they can assess their cultural values, they can assess their cultural competencies, get some tips on how to work in different cultural contexts, get some tips on how to develop it. It's a really fun tool, and it's free.
Okay, fantastic. I did go on to My Guide,
Oh,
and
great.
I did. Yep. So I signed myself up for that, which I think is a fantastic tool. Um, when you are meeting with folks, how do you help them develop a development plan to improve those agility skills?
Right. So what we tend to do, so if you think about those different competencies that I mentioned, there's those self-management competencies, relationship management competencies, and task management competencies. We tend to start looking through which ones do individuals have that are strengths. It sounds a little strange, but because of the way these competencies are wired, it's very rare that even the best leaders will have high scores on every single one of these competencies. So what tends to happen is they have one or two that's in the higher range. And we begin with those. How do you leverage those when you're in a new context? How do you leverage your humility? How do you leverage your perspective taking? How do you leverage your curiosity when you're in a new environment? Help them almost perfect what they already naturally do and do well. Help them really understand how that's improving their ability to be effective in that multicultural environment. And then we sort of, it's almost think about it like New Year's resolutions. We always then go to like, what's the one thing you can try to do to build one competency and develop that out a little more? So for example, if someone's lower in resilience, we might have them work on coping strategies or something like that. It's very specific strengths, and then, focus just very tightly on behaviors for developmental opportunities.
It correlates a lot to the behaviors that we show up with in any leadership position. So from an executive coaching standpoint, like I really can see a tremendous, our behaviors are either helping us or hurting us in some way. In cultural agility, you bring up something that's related to the unconscious biases that we have. Can you talk about that?
I'd be happy to. I mean, in truth, it might not be popular, but I'm not a fan of the phrase unconscious bias, because really what that is, all we're doing is introducing, through the training, is introducing people to their limbic systems. We have, from the time we're born, we gather data and we store data. And as a function of gathering data and storing data, we have this ability naturally to use our eyeballs and process the world around us. So we sort of understand subjective reality as a function of what we've known and stored. That's really the idea of your limbic system. And that's what's sort of been co-opted into unconscious bias. The fact that we call it a bias makes me nervous, because we all have socializing agents. We all have this, right? So of course we're going to have this thing formerly known as bias. But as a function of calling it that, we have this tendency to do the very thing that we don't want to see happen, and that is we don't engage in conversations with people who are demographically diverse from us. So it kind of goes back to that first piece of advice I offered. Any opportunity you have to interact with someone who's demographically diverse, do, because it just broadens that limbic processor. So yeah, unconscious bias is really, I know it's ubiquitous now. Every company's offering that kind of training, but I sort of am worried about what's happening as a function of that.
I think that's an excellent concern and observation. What are some of the techniques? I mean, other than starting the conversation, let's say that you have started the conversation and you've started in a way that has actually eroding trust and credibility. What would be some of the tips for self-reflection on how to build that bridge back. I, for example, work with a number of businesses that have work teams and strategic partnerships all over the world. And in some of the challenges that they have, it feels like, like that team doesn't feel respected, and so I feel like there's an opportunity to continuously build trust, even if you can't be face to face with someone. So what guidance would you give?
Right. Yeah. Trust is interesting. I mean, probably is the glue that holds every aspect of business, every aspect of relationships together. Yet what we tend to not realize is that people form and create and build and foster trust very differently. In some cultures, trust is a function of your demonstration of competence, your reliability, your dependability, your ability to execute on whatever you say you're going to do at a higher level than maybe you anyone, even you delight your customers, so to speak, and your colleagues and the like. It's really about what you do. Whereas with other cultures, trust is a function of warmth and authenticity and social connectiveness and that time together, whether sharing a meal, sharing a beer, whatever the culturally appropriate way to build that relationship-based trust. What I recommend usually what ends up happening with multicultural environment is trust tends to be built in kind of one way or the other. The people who are kind of the more of the show me what you can do types tend not to want to spend a whole lot of time in the get to know you phase. And the get to know you folks tend to think that the others are like just sort of not even treating them like people. So what we try to do is say, look, I know it's going to take a little more time, but let's spend some time with both. So let's identify as a team what outstanding work product is. What is response time? Define it. Like, do you need, if I send you an email, I'm expecting one back within blank hours, within blank days. So getting down to things that might take so much shorter of a period of time if you're in a work group that everybody's sort of operating from the same norms. If you're in that multicultural work team, you definitely want to sort of put these pieces, make them behavioral, make them tangible, and then spend time on both, establishing each other's professional credibility and also spending a little more time getting to know you. So everybody kind of has their trust base covered, if you will.
Do you think that there is a bigger challenge today because so much of our relations are happening on Zoom? Like, can you talk me through, like, what do we need to be looking for? And how can we be better?
Yeah, boy, if I've answered this one a few times in the past year and a half. So here's my one of my greatest concerns, given how much we've moved to technology, is that so many people think that the element of culture has just gone away. Hey, we're on Zoom. There's no such thing as culture. It couldn't be further from the truth. We have fewer cues to pick up on, so we're actually kind of amplifying those cues. If I can give you some sort of an example, Americans are very informal. So I was on a Zoom call with a woman who had just gone, and she's American, she went for a swim. She wrapped a towel around her bathing suit, looked appropriate. Hair was wet. She jumped on the call. I mean, it's American efficiency. She went for a swim and is on the call. She's engaging in the call. For those who are in a more formal culture, it looked incredibly inappropriate. I mean, that's just kind of one small example. I've watched my American informal colleagues eating cereal because it's morning, and you know what? It's efficient. I'm getting both things done without realizing that it's the limbic system of the people on the other. It's processing it as, you're not taking this seriously. Smiling is another one. So some cultures are known to smile. Others reserve smiles for true emotions with close friends. That will vary. distance. So right now you and I'm trying to match kind of our size. For those of you who are listening on podcasts, you know how you can move really close to your screen or farther apart. Try to match those with whom you're interacting. I could go on and on. Silence, very different depending on the cultural context. For some, silence equals engagement, and other, silence means disinterest. Those two, every little tiny thing starts to have a broader cultural meaning when you have so few cues to connect to.
I was going to ask you for examples. So those were really helpful examples. So if we were kind of going to do like a crash course on the few things that if you kind of stay within these while trying to actually make that connection, so I think mirroring the size, like I feel like that's really good. I don't want to say it's like mirroring like you do in sales, right? Per se, but is there any make sure that checklist?
Yeah, actually, Allie, it is exactly like mirroring.
Okay.
From a sales perspective, because if you think about what the nature of why it's taught in sales is because they're trying to facilitate trust with their client or customer. You're trying to do the exact same thing with someone who's on a small screen, someone with whom you don't have the ability to actually kind of breathe the same air and do like go out to lunch or go share coffee or chit chat a bit before a meeting starts or whatever. So you're losing all of those ways that social trust is built. The only thing remaining are sort of some of those cues. So mirroring actually is a really good strategy. Like, for example, I smile a lot. I try to reduce that if I'm with a colleague who is from a culture and is not a really smiley person. I try to back that up a little bit. If you're watching this, you see I gesture a lot. I try to, kind of calm that down quite a bit if I'm with someone with whom, gestures aren't expected or respected. So mirroring is actually the best crash course strategy.
Okay, well, good. That's good to know. Is there any other similar strategies that we can pick up on cues that are right in front of us that we're not there's no rule book, right?
Right. Well, there's no rule book. If you have the opportunity to meter your pace of speech, so much of international business is conducted in English. And for those of us who are native English speakers, we tend to speak faster. We tend to use jargon. We all do. It's the most natural thing in the world, and we're used to when we work with colleagues who are from the same country. It's easy. It's shorthand. It makes sense. Realizing not only kind of the speed, your use of silence, your use of idiomatic phrases, kind of meter all of those. And it's okay to periodically say, would you like me to give an example? You don't have to say, did you understand that? That's rude. But you could say, would you like me to give an example, or do you want me to elaborate more? Would you like me to? Sometimes repeating things helps, like saying it in a few different ways.
Oh, that's a good one too. Paula, you are a professor at the International School of Business at Northeastern University, correct?
Yes.
Is the campus open?
We are open, and it sounds like we're going to be fully back in action in the fall. So very excited.
Fantastic. I'm happy to hear that. In your experience as a professor on campus, is this the topic that you teach on at the school?
I do.
Okay.
I take the MBA in the undergraduate levels. Yeah.
Is it almost a mandatory class for business international students or international business students?
It's interesting. It's an important exit competency for the university, for Northeastern University. It tries to have many of our students having international experiences. So they hope to build cultural agility through experience. The class itself, not required, but I'm working on it.
It should be, I think, in a lot of ways. So your book just got released. Is that correct?
It is, yeah.
How is it doing?
It's doing great. I think, it's exciting, and because of the free app, I think it's generating a little more interest because frankly, it's really a cool opportunity for people to measure their values and measure their competencies, but it's also helping sales.
So I really enjoyed going in and looking through kind of the assessment and the free app that you have. So what is the intention or plan, long-term plan for where you're taking this?
Oh, sure. So the company that we started is called Skillify, and it's set up as a public benefit corporation. I'm so excited about it. It's set up as a public benefit corporation. That's why we're giving quite a bit away for free. Over time, what we'll do is have kind of the collaboration tools within my guide where people. So if you and I are working together, we can kind of see each other's values and with some advice on how to work more effectively together. As our team grows, we can have kind of all of our values understood in one spot. That we're doing different kind of tracks for students who are studying abroad, international students who are studying in a host country. We have a track for people who will be living and working in another country. We have a track for people who will be just virtually working with people from another country. So it's really an exciting. I'm excited of what's coming for the tool. Right now, basics are there, and it's great.
I will make sure that there is a link to your book on Amazon in the show notes. What is the best way for our listeners to follow you?
Sure, probably LinkedIn. If you can spell my last name, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I try to post articles periodically, and yeah, that would be the best.
Fantastic. I will include your LinkedIn profile in the show notes as well. Paula, thank you so much for joining us here today on the podcast. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh, Allie, thank you. My pleasure.